Our first session today starts off with a few tips on planning. This session is called Know Before You Go, the most useful things to learn about a place before traveling. Start your trip off on the right foot with useful knowledge about the place you're traveling to. Naomi Liz from Roaming the Americas has a treasure trove of suggestions and tricks for learning as much about a destination without spending hours of time. And she'll be sharing a lot of those tricks with us today. Naomi Liz loves coffee and is crazy about Latin America, but she's also the writer behind Roaming the Americas. Roaming the Americas is a travel blog that helps people plan responsible travel to engage with culture, support local communities, and protect the environment. A small town girl from Maine, Naomi has moved to the Philadelphia area, but she's been traipsing around Latin America for the past 15 years whenever she's had the chance. If you have questions or comments, please leave them in the chat window, or you can tweet at us at #ITMSummit17. Thank you so much for being a part of this summit, Naomi, and I'm so excited to learn about how to properly research destinations and get so much good information about culture and history and learning how to start conversations with people and just you've done so much of that in your travels, and I'm excited to learn more.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited too.
Nice. Yay! So I guess my first question to kind of jump into things is how often do you get out on the road? How often do you travel?
Not as much as I'd like to, of course. That's
Me
probably the
too.
case for many of us. But yeah, I would love to be traveling much more. But in recent years, I haven't done a lot of international travel. I think the last international trip that I took was a couple years ago. Although I guess if you count crossing over the border into Canada for a day, that counts. I'm a Mainer, so it's not on my mind as much. But I do travel within the states pretty often. My family lives in Maine. I live in the Philadelphia area, and my in-laws live in Connecticut and Florida. So much of my husband and my vacation time is spent on road trips or traveling to Florida. So we try to take advantage of those times as well to kind of get some relaxation and seeing some fun sights when we're out.
Absolutely. And we're so blessed to live in a country that has such diversity. I mean, you just go to
Yeah.
any state and it's like seeing a whole new country sometimes with the landscape and the cultures and just so
Hmm.
many amazing things to see. So yeah, I feel very blessed to live in such a great country for travel.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm curious, what is your planning process like? So when you decide to travel to any place new, what do you start with?
Well, of course, there's, the logistical side of things, just figuring out where to stay and what places I want to go out to eat and just sites to see. So it's a lot of Googling, it's a lot of Pinterest and asking on Facebook. And I'm always looking for more ways to kind of get a little bit more organized with that. So I do use Google Drive to kind of throw ideas into. I also use Google My Maps. I don't know, it's one of those Google apps that not everybody knows about, but
Yeah.
it's one of their many apps, and I can go on my desktop and basically create a map and put pins for places that I want to go, and I can put notes in there, and then I can access it on my phone as I go. But that's kind of like the logistical side of things. I also like to uh, dig into the culture of a place
Mm.
and kind of get to know the story, find out more about the history, find out about the culture. Even if it's like you said, within the United States, even there's a
Mhm.
lot of diversity, and just from Philadelphia to Maine, like there's such a culture shift, um, and I find it fascinating to learn about the history and what a place is like and what it's like to live in a place. So I try to find resources for that. And again, my process isn't exactly linear, but I look for good resources, maybe just books that are set in the place or books about the place. I ask people that live there, questions, and um, I just try to dig in and get to know it even before I go, because I think it just helps me understand it a little bit better when I'm there.
Nice. So, do talking to people that live there, um, I mean, I'm sure if you have friends or family or people that you could reach out to them first. Are there resources that you use if you don't know anyone living there? Is there kind of a process you use to find them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I I I think I tend to use social media a lot. Um, that it's just such a good, quick way to find people. Um, and so I don't exactly have a process for that part of it, but I just reach out on social media and ask. I might just post something on my personal Facebook profile, or I'm in a lot of Facebook travel groups. I'm in probably too many, but I will just post in there, and usually I get some great responses. Whether it's people who have lived there in the past, or maybe are from there, or have family from there, that's a great way to start, I think.
Excellent. Wonderful. Good advice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Um, so you mentioned culture. Really looking into culture and history. Are those like the main topics that you really try to dig into when you're researching, or I guess what are some other topics that you think are important to learn about before visiting a place?
Yeah, I think it can vary. I think it's helpful to look into things that you're interested in, in your own life at home, because you'll tend to be more interested, and it's easy to read about those things. So for me, I am interested in history, and culture and language. Language is a big thing for me as well, and current events. So those are the things that I try to get a little insight on before I go.
Nice. Great. And so, I guess speaking to that effect, my husband and his friend are big soccer fans. And so every time they go to Spain or Italy, they try to, keep up to date on the latest, soccer scores and what those teams are doing. And it's a really good
Yeah.
conversation starter. I mean, even if you don't speak the local language, sometimes you can find someone who does know a little English, or if you just mention the team name, it's like, hey, go Juventus,
Oh my
then
goodness. Yeah.
then you already have an in at
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. I mean, I lived in Costa Rica for a semester when I was in college, and I can't tell you how many times I heard my host dad yelling for soccer games when they were scoring, and like singing the chant for Costa Rican soccer team. So um, that's a great way, especially, I mean, even if you don't love sports, but soccer, or football for most of the world, baseball in the Caribbean, finding out what people love, and what they're committed to in the region, it can bring a lot of insight to your trip.
Nice. Awesome. um, so I guess why do you think it's so important to learn about the culture and to really dive into its history before traveling? What are some ideas behind why that is important?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I love talking about this topic, because I actually am a former history hater. I really, I mean, I hated it in school, elementary school, high school. It was the most boring subject to me, and I really saw it as just I had to learn these dates and memorize names and these battles, and it was such a long time ago. It was just these pictures in textbooks, and it was absolutely boring. I unfortunately never really had a history teacher that made it come alive and helped me see the story of history. And I didn't have that until I studied abroad in Costa Rica. And that semester totally changed how I approach traveling. It changed it forever. And the reason is that their philosophy for traveling and for learning was very experiential. And so they actually had a motto, or it's a quote by somebody, and I can't remember his name, but it says, "In doing, we learn." And so it was just woven into every aspect of our semester. For example, we would study different topics around Latin America. And one that I remember was racism in Costa Rica. And it was towards the beginning of our semester. And, we had tons of reading, we had guest speakers, and we were expected to participate and dialogue and apply the things that we were learning to the conversations we were having in class. But beyond that, we were assigned a paper. It's just a short paper. It was supposed to be based on interviews that we would just have to go out into the street and talk to Costa Ricans about this topic. And so we were assigned, go. We lived in the capital city, and they said go find 2 or 3 white Costa Ricans or Costa Ricans of European descent and ask them about this topic. And then find several Afro-Costa Ricans and talk to them about this topic. And then we took a study trip, like within a few weeks of starting the study, to an area of Costa Rica on the Caribbean coast where most of the Afro-Costa Ricans historically and currently live. And so then when we got there, we also had to ask more people these same kind of questions. And so it was about having those conversations about things that we were studying in class. And we did that for so many different things as we prepared to go to Nicaragua, Cuba, Guatemala, and we were learning about their history. And some of that was like civil wars that are recent enough for me as someone born in the 1980s to remember. Mm-hmm. And that just blew my mind. I thought, like, okay, I could have been a little girl and I could remember a civil war, and I could remember like my mom cooking at the stove with a rifle strapped on her back if I had lived in these places. And it just brought it to life so much for me. And the fact that we weren't just learning it in the books, but we were talking to people whose lives had been affected by this. And so that just sort of started a journey for me that now I see how history really shapes culture and culture shapes history. And it's just this interesting journey. And so really, for me, learning these things helps to deepen my experience. It helps me connect with locals. If you think about it, when you're at home, what are the things that you talk to your neighbors or your distant relatives around the dinner table, or maybe just your friends, if you want to, be polite in unfamiliar company. But what are those discussions that you're having? Probably in a lot of places, people are also having those conversations about things that are happening in their communities. And so when you can come in and kind of get to dialogue with people about those things, it helps you connect on a deeper level. And so that's one of the main reasons that I love it. I think it also gives you some context and the backstory to understand what's happening now. So, you might see news headlines, and without a backstory or understanding a little bit of the history, and again, it's not about memorizing all these dates and names, it's just about kind of understanding that big picture. Then it helps you to understand what's happening now and kind of piece things together and be able to ask good, engaging questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that would really separate, a traveler from a tourist. A traveler is someone who's really actually interested in learning about a place and engaging in some of that culture, even if, you can't learn the language or enough of the language to engage in a full conversation before you go. It still separates you, and it really shows when you have a little bit of knowledge behind, that community and what they've been going through and, maybe what has kind of shaped their culture to begin with, just in a kind of an overview of their history.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I can think of a couple experiences. I know in the Dominican Republic and then in Guatemala, I was there in both of those places during their elections. And so when I was in Guatemala a few years ago, I had been reading the news, or at least some of the headlines. And so I kind of knew, they've got like 14 candidates. And One of them is this like historically significant woman, and I'm curious what people are thinking about all of that. And when I was in the Dominican Republic, I didn't have that backstory, and like the streets were crazy, and I was like, why? You know, what's going on here? And so it just, yeah, I think it really helps you have those deeper conversations and brings to light things that you might not notice otherwise.
Exactly. And so the idea of learning so much about a place can be overwhelming at first, especially if people aren't used to doing that kind of legwork.
Yeah.
What are some baby steps? What are some like things that people can start researching and then get more in depth as they go along?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I am all about the idea of it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like, you don't have to read 5 history books to do this process. I am all about just take baby steps and get curious. And so some very practical ideas that you can try are, one is you can set your homepage browser on your computer to a local newspaper, whether it's the national newspaper of a country or a city newspaper of a city that you're going to travel to soon. So just set your browser homepage to that. And if it's in a foreign language, usually Google will translate it, or they'll have an English version. And that'll just pop up kind of whenever you open up the internet. And yeah, most of the time the stories can be grim. So, take it with a grain of salt, or,
The news.
consider that's the same kind of stuff that's probably happening in your own country. But you can kind of just glance over the headlines. It kind of gives you a picture of what's happening. And then if you see something that interests you, like if you're into sports and you see sports headlines that interest you, then click on it maybe once a week or something, whenever something is interesting. Another thing you can do is follow those news outlets on social media, or not just news outlets, but maybe local community organizations, or just a tourism board from that country or that city. Following them on social media, and you'll just kind of start to see things popping up in your newsfeed. And if something interests you, then you can read a little bit more about it. So that's another idea that you can try. Like I said, you can see if you can talk to somebody that's from that place, if you find anybody, or reach out on social media. And another thing that I like to do is look for podcasts. Now, not every place is going to have a podcast or podcast episode about it, but you might be surprised when you start digging some of the ones that are out there. I, for example, know that I want to go to Colombia someday. My dad grew up there, and so it's been on my list for many years. And I came across a podcast called Colombia Calling, and it's just this journalist he's an expat, and he lives in Colombia, and he does a podcast every week, and it's about tons of different topics. But I know that I want to travel there, and so it just kind of gives me a picture of various things, and I try to listen to it occasionally. There's other podcasts that might be like news podcasts. I know if you're trying to learn a language, you might be able to find a news podcast that's intended for language learners. So it's kind of giving you news, and it's in more basic foreign language as well. There's one called News in Slow Spanish and News in Slow Spanish Latino.
Awesome.
So yeah, those are options if you're trying to learn Spanish, if you have maybe like basic to intermediate understanding already. So podcasts are a great option as well. And then lastly, you can read a book or watch a film. And again, these don't have to be like a history book or this history documentary that's super boring. I mean, and you might find, and I think they're not all boring. Like, they're not all textbooks or like dry documentaries. There's some really interesting ones out there. But you could also just look for a book or a film that's set in the location that you're traveling to, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And that can just kind of give you a little bit of the flavor, the local flavor, of that place. It could also be like a topical book, like you were mentioning sports, or if there's another topic that you're interested in, art, music, ballet, anything, you might be surprised as you start to look for it, the resources that are out there. And so you might find books, you might find just articles or interesting films about those places, and that topic. So that would be another suggestion. It's kind of getting a little bit meatier, with the books and films. But again, just take baby steps. And the important thing, I think, is to be curious. And even if it's just one of those small things, or maybe you try one of this and one of that, and try it and see how it goes. I think you hopefully will find that it really enriches the experience. So
Yeah, nice. Something that kind of came to mind when you were talking, when I went to Mexico a while back, I did similar things. I was trying to find, the authentic, real culture of Mexico and not the Cancun experience. And so a friend of mine actually had come across a book that a lot of high schoolers read in Mexico. And so, kind of like our, Color Purple, or, books that, most everybody reads in America. They have, books that they read in high school. And one book was called Ultima. And it was kind of this magical story about a grandmother who was also the town witch. And but it weaved so much of that culture from that community into the story, and really kind of like through the story of this boy who has all these fun experiences. He's learning about his world, and so is the reader. And so I was able to find an English translation of the book, and I read that. And when I visited Mexico, I just felt like I had a different context, than if I hadn't read something. And
yeah, absolutely. I love that. Like, that's such a great idea. That's awesome.
Yeah, I figured from now on, it's like I'm going to try to get a list of the books that the students have to read in high school and see if I can find an English version or.
And also, this is not as maybe enlightening or studious, but Netflix has a lot of foreign shows on there. And so some of them, like if you're trying to learn the language, or you have intermediate language level, you can watch it in the foreign language. But if you don't, then you can watch the English subtitles. And I mean, I watched a Colombian soap opera last year, which was a soap opera, but it was still, I still felt like I was getting pieces of the culture, just through the language and how they spoke to each other. And it wasn't an American show translated to Spanish. It was a Colombian show. So that's another.
Absolutely. And getting that communities or cultures media that they might be watching on a regular basis. I think that's a wonderful window into, either a conversation starter, like you said, or just kind of, seeing how they view the world, possibly.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. So what have been some of the more trickier destinations to research? Maybe places that it is harder to find like sometimes credible information as well.
Yeah, I think the one, I would say the place that comes to mind for me the most would be Cuba. Now, a lot of the places that I traveled were with my study abroad program, so I was given the information. I was given the packets of material that I had to read. And I did first go to Cuba with them. So I kind of had a little bit to start with, but I went again in 2014. And I think the thing that is challenging about Cuba is that there tends to be a lot of biased information. And that might be true in other places, but I don't think it's as strong of storylines as with Cuba. When I went with my study abroad program in 2004, we read excerpts of a book called Cuba, Neither Heaven Nor Hell. And it was written by a woman who was Cuban American and went back to research. And that has always stuck with me because I kind of just saw like the biased information that we got in the United States, and then some of the biased information that I got on the ground in Cuba. Um, and so I would say that's maybe the more challenging destination
Okay.
to research.
Yeah, I could absolutely see that. Especially, for us Americans who have always seen a different side of Cuba. We've always seen the romanticized version with, old cars and, you know, Cuba Libres.
Yeah, that, and then, but then also like a very specific story about the Cuban Revolution and Fidel Castro.
Yes.
That maybe is not the whole picture, and I think it's a complex topic, so I don't want to get too far into it.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, it's complex. I think that's the thing, and so the what I've done in terms of just learning about Cuba is trying to find those resources that are as unbiased as possible, but then also reading both. Not just reading one and not the other, but reading some of the biased stuff on this side and some on that side.
Absolutely. And yeah, by getting all those different perspectives, hopefully you can come to a reliable perspective yourself of what you're walking into.
Exactly.
Great. Yeah, I guess that kind of gets into like how do you know that the facts you're researching are correct? And like you said, if you're reading newspapers, sometimes those facts might not be correct. Sometimes they are. Just like with our own newspapers, there's a slightly different take on a story. And so I guess, is there anything that you do to make sure that what you're learning is as accurate as possible?
There is, I think when I'm researching on, or just reading on things like blogs or just any old website, and I try to look for ones that maybe are citing where they're getting the information.
Okay.
As a blogger myself, I'm not dissing on bloggers, but I have unfortunately read some blogs that I knew had incorrect information. Or misinformation. And, so for myself, when I am writing blogs, I try to cite those sources. So if I'm reading blogs, they're providing that information, then I try to click through and read it. But I think just as much as possible, going as close to the source as possible. So whether it's looking at governmental websites, reputable news organizations, and just trying to take in a variety of content to kind of like fact check that. So I don't know that I necessarily have like a specific process, but I try to remember to check myself and to check and to just remember like, oh, there's bad information out there, and just make sure to do my due diligence.
Okay, great. That's good advice.
Yeah.
Definitely. I'm curious, so when you're going to a place, you've learned as much about it. Sometimes, I mean, I know for me, sometimes if I do so much research, I get an idea in my head as to how this culture is gonna be. And so I set myself up for, maybe a different kind of experience. But there's always culture shock. There's always, the way that I'm envisioning it is never the way it really is. And that's one of the wonderful parts of travel. But how do you handle culture shock?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I think one of the most important things is giving yourself space as you're traveling to process. And allowing yourself to have some of that white space and some of that downtime where you're not always go, go, go. You're not always necessarily interacting with people from that culture. I think you need time to kind of decompress and be alone with your thoughts. So whether that's, and sometimes it's not totally alone. So some of the ways that I have found helpful in processing and reflecting on my own cultural assumptions, my own cultural behaviors, why I felt a certain way in a situation, or, there's been many times where I realized right after I did something like, I am such an American. I cannot believe I just did that. And, so sometimes I realize it right then, but sometimes it really takes having that alone time and writing in a journal. I know when I was studying abroad, like that was gold, that time where I could just write about all of my experiences, just very openly and not worrying about how I sounded or if I was being judgmental or if I was, would be embarrassing. I could just really write out all my thoughts and process through those things. Another thing that helps, I think, is processing through it with other people. If you're traveling with someone else that's also from your home culture, just kind of processing it with them and talking about your experiences with them in a very intentional way. And also, if you have somebody from your host culture that you have an open enough relationship with where they could kind of give you cultural feedback, that those can be good conversations as well. But realize, like, if you don't have a close relationship with somebody in another culture, they may not feel comfortable, depending on what their culture is like, to give you that feedback. But really, in a nutshell, I think a really important thing as you're there and as you come back from the trip is having that white space and allowing yourself time to reflect.
Absolutely. I felt similar. Sometimes the first few days, my husband and I just went to Rome. And so the first few days, it was crazy. I was expecting people, but I was not expecting, people smoking everywhere and trash everywhere. And I guess I had in my mind, a better, picture of cleaner streets and, and things like that. And so I'm walking around, I'm like, this isn't as beautiful as I thought it was going to be. and I had to step back and be like, okay, that was in my head. This is, what Rome is really about. And so after we got off the beaten paths and we started walking down, the little streets, and I could actually see, locals doing, what they do every day. And it was beautiful. It had its own beauty. And so it was just me getting out of my bubble and seeing the culture for what it really is. And it was gorgeous. And I came back and I don't remember any of the negative parts of the trip. I don't remember my feet, hurting after 14 miles of walking. And, it's all about, the wonderful food and the, amazing people that we met. And those are the things you come back with. And, I think you have to remember that in the moment when things get overwhelming is, you're going to remember the good parts. And it's all going to be worth it.
Yeah.
Awesome. So where are you headed to next? What's your next big adventure?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have a potential trip coming up, and it's not all finalized yet, so I don't know if I'm going to spill the beans yet, but it's somewhere in Canada, and so I have been having fun kind of researching that. And other than that, I am going to be going to Boston next month, which I've been to. As a New England girl, that was like the big city, the only city pretty much 4 hours away from where I lived. But I haven't been back as an adult, so I'm going to be there for a conference for a few days.
Nice.
So that should be fun as well.
Yeah. Have you learned anything interesting and new about these new destinations you're headed to?
Yeah, so where I'm potentially traveling to in Canada, I have been researching a lot about the Indigenous culture there, and I found out about this place that where the Indigenous tribes, and I don't know the names of which tribes are in that area, but where they used to hunt buffalo, and it's this big cliff. Or bison, I'm sorry. I guess, I don't know, bison and buffalo are technically different, but they use both names. But they would herd or stampede the buffalo off the edge of this cliff in order to hunt them for like the winter, to have food for the winter. And they use every part of the bison, which I think is awesome. And historically, I don't think they do it anymore, but historically they used to run them off the edge of this cliff. So I thought it was very intriguing, and I hope to be able to visit that that location if they go.
Yeah. Gets the job done,
Yeah.
I suppose. Wow, very cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for sharing all your advice and your insight. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you think would be useful for viewers and when it just comes to learning about places before you travel?
I think we covered quite a bit of good stuff. I would just encourage everyone, like I said, stay curious and just be open to learning. If this is something new for you, you don't have to be overwhelmed. You don't have to like dig in and read 10 books. Just do one thing for your next trip, and then see, if you get to have any conversations with people as you're traveling, and yeah, see where it takes you.
Nice, nice. And I know I've talked to a lot of people who they get nervous about talking about some of these subjects, or they don't think that they're going to find someone who speaks English, or, like, how do I like, this is a really cool topic. How do I talk about it in another language? You always have your guides, if you, have a local guide, you can always have them, interact, have a conversation, or maybe have them help you have a conversation with, a shop owner or someone. But yeah, I mean, it's I guess about connecting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love language, and so I definitely encourage people to, if they're going to a place, learn at least a little bit of the language. Now that might not allow you to have conversations, but if you're interested in diving deeper, I would definitely encourage you to do your best to learn as much of the language as you can. And again, if not, there's in a lot of places people that speak English, like you said, a guide, or if you go to a museum, places that tend to cater to tourists, or have foreign visitors, will be likely to speak English, and that's a great place to start if you don't speak the language. So.
Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you again, and it's so great having you here. And like I said, your advice is very valuable.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was so fun, and I'm super excited to just be part of this summit and hear from all the other speakers. It's going to be awesome.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hey everybody, Claire Hancock here from Immersion Travel Magazine. Today is the second day of the Sustainable Travel Summit and our topic is packing and preparing for sustainable destinations. We're covering topics like planning, limiting culture shock, and how to pack light. Experts like Pack for a Purpose, Papelia, GeoSure, Hosling International USA, and many more will be sharing their tips and tricks with you throughout the day. You can ask them questions in our chat window, or you can hop on Twitter and ask them with the hashtag ITMSummit17. Our sponsor today is Grail, a company that makes water purification bottles, and today they're giving away 3 of their ultralight bottles. So check out our website to find out more. One more thing before we continue, our Kickstarter. Immersion Travel Magazine wants to be everything that your travel magazine should be, but we can't do that without member support. So please check out our Kickstarter and become a member today. Thank you for your support. Let's get packing. In our next session, we're going to learn how to travel fearlessly. Culture shock can slow a vacation down and sometimes make it difficult to enjoy. One way to lessen culture shock is to learn about the culture ahead of time. Sophia Hyder from Papelia is going to share her expertise on researching cultures and feeling comfortable in new places, so we truly can travel fearlessly. Sophia Hyder is an international development professional, founder of Papelia, and culture etiquette expert. Her desire for creating global impact has taken her to over 30 countries, working with international and local clients on contracts upwards of $500 million. The concept for Papelia was born out of a passion for travel and curiosity to experience culture in a mindful and responsible way. As an avid traveler, she spent hours researching cultural nuances and etiquette to ensure she would feel confident and comfortable in any business or leisure setting. Sophia has combined her personal and professional experiences to develop customized cross-cultural communication trainings for clientele who want to build confidence, influence their audience, and set themselves apart from their competition.
Sophia, welcome to the summit. I'm so excited to have you here. And really, I'm happy to learn all about Papelia and what it means to be a fearless traveler and how to become a fearless traveler.
Well, I'm excited to be here, Claire. Thank you so much for having me on this amazing summit. I'm really excited to learn and share everything travel related. So, what does it mean to be a fearless traveler? Loaded question, but simple. It can be a simple answer. Fearless traveler. To me, a fearless traveler is wide open to new possibilities wherever they're traveling. So it can be in their hometown, it could be in a new country, it could even be in a familiar place as well. So it's a matter of being curious and asking questions and wanting to experience something new or something familiar that really fulfills their soul. And fearless, just as a caution, does not mean careless. So a traveler has to still be aware of their surroundings for safety reasons. So it's all about what fulfills your soul and what you enjoy and just learning about a different culture. No judgment.
Wonderful. I think many of us then have the propensity to become fearless travelers.
Yes, it's easy.
Excellent. So a little bit about your background. You've traveled to many destinations around the world, and you've started helping companies and individuals plan itineraries that work best for them, but also fit in the sustainable travel milieu.
Yes.
And I'd like to know, what is the earliest trip you remember taking, and what made it so memorable?
Oh, wow. So the earliest trip was when I was 10 years old. The one that is the most memorable. We moved to Sri Lanka when I was 10. And I lived in California. I'm from California. So huge difference.
Yeah.
Huge cultural shift. And there were so many things that were so memorable about that experience. I remember, it's my first overseas flight that's over 20 hours, and quite honestly, I don't know how my mom could dealt with me then. So I give her a lot of credit. But what I remember is getting off the plane and having the humidity just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I remember seeing a sea of palm trees. No people, no, skyscrapers or anything. And I still remember that like it was yesterday. But what also made this a real memorable experience was that I was exposed to a completely different culture, a new way of seeing how people live. And I was fascinated by all of it. When you're 10 years old, you absorb your surroundings like a sponge. Mm-hmm. And I also witnessed poverty for the first time. I was used to being in California and seeing all these $1 million homes on the beach. And the opposite was the case in Sri Lanka. So you see a lot of, tin huts along the beach. And it really just turns your whole perspective around. And I didn't know how to reconcile that because I was used to living a certain way, and I didn't know, what that meant. So that was actually the foundation for my international development work. That's what sparked my interest in it. And it's now I've always been aware of how lucky I am, but also how other people live good, in good ways and in different ways, and it's more of an awareness. So I'll never forget that trip.
Yeah, wow, what a transformative experience.
Yeah.
Ooh, wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I remember I didn't want to go and leave my friends, when you're 10 years old, and it's one of those trips that after it was all done, there's so much to process, and you just don't realize how much of an impact it is until maybe it's over, too.
How long did you stay in Sri Lanka?
2 years.
2 years, wow.
Yeah, and it was when there was a civil war that was still going on at the time. And there was actually, quite a few unfortunate, suicide bombings, and a lot of things were going on politically. Also, again, for a 10-year-old, how do you wrap your mind around something like that?
Yeah, you went from textbooks learning about, past civil wars or hearing about it on the news to having it probably be close to your backyard.
It was. It really was. Yeah, it's a huge eye-opener in so many different ways.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm sure your experiences there also maybe introduced you to sustainable travel and, traveling with a lesser environmental impact or a negative impact on communities, and how to travel lighter and have a positive effect.
Yeah.
So I guess when did you really start implementing sustainable travel methods into your travels?
So I think that 10 years old is, again, that really crazy, impactful moment that I have. And it started then because I remember us having to boil water in our house, and I didn't understand why we couldn't just drink water out of a tap because I was used to doing that. And I didn't understand why the water was contaminated. So I really got to thinking about resources and the scarcity of resources, and how we as a society are responsible to use what we have wisely. And it affects local culture. It affects really everyone and everything without really realizing it. So by connecting, so I remember that, and then I've always thought about sustainability and resources since then. So I would, even as a 10-year-old, I would talk to, we'd go and we'd travel to, we've been to India, we went to the Swat Valley up in near the Himalayas in Pakistan, and I would always talk to local people to understand what their cultures and their communities were like. So I'd ask them about light, like where they get their light from, and generators, and how tourists, how they interact with tourists, and the use of water, and how far they have to go to get water. So I'd always been curious about sustainability and travel, and it's developed through my professional travel as well as personal travel. So I try to humanize a destination by talking to people, and by doing that, I'm able to better understand their environment, so I can get the perspective, but I can also respect the local environment.
Beautiful. I'd like to talk a little bit about culture shock. And I feel like no matter what we do, there's still going to be a little culture shock no matter where we go. I even get culture shock sometimes when I go to Canada, just because it feels so similar, but it has so many differences that just makes me feel like, whoa, where am I?
Right. Yeah.
What are some things that we can do to help limit culture shock, and are there some resources that we can utilize to kind of help prepare for trips like that?
Yeah, totally. So the question you just asked me is how the idea for Papilia originated. I was actually going to a friend of mine's wedding in Argentina, and I was looking for anything that could help me pack in a way that was efficient, culturally appropriate. I didn't want to be embarrassed whenever I, went to Argentina. I needed to make sure I was prepared for it. So it's that age-old question, right? What I did, so aside from Papilia, what I do is I talk to friends and family who have traveled to the place that I'm going to. I check the weather, so I'm not surprised by weather patterns, and I'm making sure I'm taking the right shoes or something warm if need be. But what I do is I research cultural norms. So one of the types of cultural norms is understanding whether a mindset is either more conservative or more liberal, because that will dictate your packing list. So that's one. With respect to other cultural norms, I spend time researching holidays. I know some people that have gone to Middle Eastern countries when Ramadan happens, so they're expecting to have a great vacation on their vacation time, not realizing that the whole country typically shuts down during Ramadan. Yep. As an example. I research eating habits and timing. So you don't want to, you want to be hungry when there's a siesta that's happening, for example. Facial and hand gestures are a very important thing to make sure that you don't have strange culture shock. I remember in Sri Lanka, actually, and usually in India, where a no really means yes. So
like the head bob, right? Sometimes you don't always know.
So that right there, the yes no, can always be a very strange and confusing thing. So knowing sometimes that a no means yes is a way to make sure you prepare for that culture shock. Spatial distances are also something that I think, as being at least in the Western culture, you like your space. Certain cultures don't think about that, and so it's just a matter of being acclimated to that or being aware. Basic phrases, how to bargain is another big one.
Yeah.
And quick story about that. I remember when I went to China for the first time, I bargained up as opposed to bargaining down. And it was for pearls. It was when I was, I don't know, I think must have been 18 or something. And I bargained up, and both of us got so confused because she was like, wait a second, this is not how we do this.
Yeah.
And then as I understood, I was like, oh. And then I know I did the half and the half and the half, and she's like, yes, that's correct. That's the right price. So it's just funny, right? So learn how to bargain. Transportation is another big one, just to make sure that you know that if you're going by bus, for example, road conditions. So certain buses may go really fast, and if you get car sick or if you don't want to be in that type of setting, know that you shouldn't be traveling by bus, for example. Exchange rates, health tips, safety tips. So I know I just threw out a lot of different things, but depending upon your own situation, transportation, for example, may be more important to you than an exchange rate. So you pick and choose which topics matter to you.
Okay. So if someone is interested in traveling to Thailand, and so what would be some good resources? I mean, obviously, we can check into Papilia and talk to you and try to get some really good information from experts who have already been there and who have done a lot of this research, like yourself. Are there other resources that you would suggest tapping into?
Yeah. So there are a few that I like to use. Travel Plus Social Good is actually one of my favorite ones. And what I love about Travel Plus Social Good is that they have hubs around the world. And if you want to go to Thailand, for example, and if there's a local hub there, you can ask them questions and ask them, be able to really connect with someone that is from there that knows a lot about the tourism industry, about local travel, maybe local tourists.
Great. Okay.
That's one of my favorites. I really like this new initiative by Sustainable Travel International. So they have their Travel Better Club, and they take you through a course that helps you think a little bit more about different cultural mindsets and cultural etiquette. And they also provide you with tips that you should just think about that you may not think about. And after you take that course, you have access to different discount codes and other partners that are a part of the Travel Better Club.
Excellent.
So, and it's great because it's not just travel; it's again about sustainable travel.
Absolutely. So taking that extra step in limiting impact and making sure that the communities, the environment you're in, is benefiting from your time there.
Right. Right.
Excellent. Okay. So Travel Plus Social Good, the Better Travel Club with STI. Any others you like to use?
I'm learning a lot more. So I'm not as familiar with this, and I'm learning more about it now. Volunteer travel is another big one, and you may know more about these organizations than I do at this point. But I'm doing more research, and as I do my research, I'm happy to share it with the community about not just the volunteer part to make yourself feel better type of travel, but also the type of volunteer travel that takes one more step to learn about the sustainability elements within the local culture. So I'm actually personally trying to now do more research on that avenue of sustainable travel.
Excellent. And yesterday, Thursday of the summit, we delved into that topic a little bit. Ethan Gelber put a nice book together from volunteer travel experts from around the world. It's called Adventures Less Ordinary, and it is available on our schedule. And so if any viewers missed yesterday and are also interested in learning more about volunteer travel and then the best ways to do that responsibly and sustainably, we have a lot of great content. We had an amazing panel, and we also talked to Orit Strauss from Giving Way. She started this amazing platform that connects with NGOs around the world who can then talk to volunteers personally. So you can actually email that NGO
and say, okay, I have these skills. Are you in need of these skills? I am really interested in traveling in your area and helping you out. And so that way you can communicate one-on-one instead of having a mediary doing all that communication for you and taking usually a sizable financial chunk.
Yeah.
And so that way also all your money, if you have to spend money, that goes directly to the NGO.
That's awesome. I'm definitely going to check out that book. Before I forget, in terms of other resources, there are a lot of different Facebook travel pages, depending upon if you're traveling solo, if you're a female traveler, where it's an open forum to ask questions and to get, a variety of different answers. But one thing with all the resources that we're talking about is it's always important to me to triangulate the information that you receive, because everyone has a different perspective. And it's always good to check different resources to make sure that you have a full understanding of the information that you've collected, to make sure that you're comfortable wherever you are going in the world.
Absolutely. That is always so important, and it goes to show with almost anything you do in life. If you really want to learn more about something, you want to start getting involved in something, then learn as much about it as you can, learn from different resources, and then come up with your own understanding. Yeah. That's great advice. Excellent. So could you share, we kind of talked about culture shock and culture etiquette and learning some etiquette before you travel. Could you share a few general rules that are good to follow no matter where you are? Some good things to start with.
I can do that. So the first is acknowledging that every culture is different. So your habits at home may not be acceptable to the destination that you're traveling to. And just be aware of that. So don't be stuck to, well, I do it this way. You're traveling somewhere else, so make sure you respect that culture the best you can. Depending upon where you are, if it's not a historical site, for example, ask for permission before taking pictures. In Burma, for example, they have this poster that tells you not to take pictures of a woman bathing in the river, or just personal things that are personal to people, even though tourists may not have seen it before. Women should, when in doubt, always bring a shawl. So you never know when you may just need to cover your shoulders if you're going to a temple, or if you're cold somewhere. It shows respect and that you've taken one extra step, even if you may be wearing, a skirt. Learn basic forms of communication. So how to greet or say thank you, or, where's the bathroom, or my apologies. Those are important things you need to know.
A phrase I've always learned is, I'm sorry, I don't speak whatever language is being spoken.
I don't understand.
Yeah, I don't understand. No comprendo.
Where's the bathroom? I was thinking, donde está el baño? For some reason, always.
Right, always.
Question. The other, a big thing that's come up now, when you're showing respect for local cultures is also another phrase is, if you have any allergy concerns, making sure that you know how to communicate that into the local language. And, I had mentioned this before, but learning facial expressions and hand gestures are important, just to make sure, you don't, maybe be neutral in the way you're communicating if you're local, because either eye contact or, just certain facial expressions may turn another culture off and you may not know it.
Right, absolutely. That reminds me of, I spent some time in Thailand a while back, and, especially with children, in America, if a child runs by and, they give you a hug, sometimes you like to put your hand on their head, or you pat them on the head and say, hey, good job. And, that's a huge sign of disrespect. And so you don't touch anyone on the head, not children, no one. And you kind of be careful of where you point your feet sometimes, because some cultures, if you point your feet directly at them, that can be very disrespectful. And so it was actually kind of fun for me. Is like, oh yeah, don't do that. That's disrespectful. Point your feet a different way, and just like remembering those things and knowing that most everywhere I went, I was a way of saying hello. Sometimes could be using the way.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't know how to use it. You bow at certain.
Yeah, I was going to say the bow. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, with the bow, you bow at certain levels depending on who you're greeting. And of course, I knew nothing about that. I was just, waving to everybody. And they appreciated that I was trying, even though I might have been botching it. But it's just trying and doing the best you can to assimilate to some of that culture while you're there. And it was very much appreciated.
Yeah, it's just showing respect and that you're trying. That's really what it's about, and your body language will show that.
Yes, absolutely.
And one more thing about food is that you may not like all the food you try. You may not be used to a certain spice intake or a certain flavor, but be discreet about how you feel, because food is a strong part of culture. And it can be offensive if you outwardly don't like it. And it's another form of respect.
Wow, that's really important. And we're going to get into food on Sunday, and kind of talking about how to find authentic food. And a lot of times, like you said, when you find authentic food, you might find some flavors that might not taste good to you. But yeah, that is. Thank you very much for reminding us. It's if you don't like it, try to be discreet.
Just like maybe discreet batting of the eye, looking down a little bit. Nothing that's outwardly like, oh no, this is not going to be good for my stomach later.
This is gross.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
No problem. When you're done that's why I say it.
So, you've been all over the world. Have there been some cultures that it was maybe more difficult to try to do these things, to try to assimilate, or you also mentioned bargaining at one point. That can be quite a shocker or difficult for some.
Right. Oh yeah. So when there was a time period when I was vegetarian, and I would go to I remember I was in Pakistan for work, and I would either go to someone's house and they had this amazing kebab, and I couldn't eat it, so I'd have to respectfully say, this is not really in my diet today. It smells really good. Maybe I'll just have the bread and the vegetables, because Pakistan is they have a lot of really good kebabs and a lot of good meat. So so that was really difficult for me in a place where a diet is mainly meat heavy. It's not as vegetable heavy. So it's just awareness and being prepared. So if you have certain restrictions like that, know that, be aware of it, and know that certain places may not accommodate to that. So what are you going to do? Are you going to bring your own snacks to sustain yourself till you find a place that has food that you're going to trust? So it's appreciating the culture. You're there because you're curious, but then also doing your due diligence to prepare ahead of time. Bargaining, you brought bargaining up. It's one of my favorite things. But it's also a very it's a very cultural practice, and it's different in so many different places. I bring up China again because if you are not interested in something, never make eye contact with a vendor, because you somehow will get you will somehow be going back to that vendor, and somehow will be buying something. And it's all because you made like that glance and eye contact, and they picked up on it. So if you're going to look at their things, I would suggest kind of like looking down as you walk and not making that eye contact.
Okay.
And other places, it's a matter of, like in Mexico, for example, is kind of they're so, and it's similar in different cultures. It's really similar all over, right? Bargaining is, because it's a negotiation tactic, but how you do it is really the key. In Mexico, it's a matter of looking really not interested, and then scoping out what really grabs your attention, coming back. But you always want to have a price in your mind, and you know that they're going to come down to it, but always kind of quarter it, so you know that you're going to come back to your price. In Mexico, at least half it. Quarter it, and know you're going to come up to the half, so you're not going to be disappointed.
Okay, good.
If that made any sense. I can write a blog about this and do the math for you if you need some examples.
Well, and it's funny because bargaining is such a huge part, and so with some places when you go, bargaining is expected, and if you don't do it, it can almost be considered rude.
Right.
Even though, and from an American, perspective, it's like, I'm giving you more money. Why is this a rude thing? But it is part of that culture, and so learning how to do that can be very important. But then I've also been to some parts where bargaining is only accepted with locals, and so if you come in as a traveler and you're trying to bargain, then that can be considered rude as well.
Right.
And so a lot of times, I try to go in and listen, see if others are bargaining, and then maybe try and maybe not be as harsh. Be like,
right.
Oh, well, maybe if it was this price. But yeah, my experience with bargaining is minimal compared to many other travelers, such as yourself, who've been doing it and seen it around the world.
Well, it honestly, it goes again back to facial expressions. It goes back to body language, and it's you pinpointed. It's reading that body language to see what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and also the other is working in local currency. You may be doing an exchange rate in dollars and saying, okay, that's not so bad, but you have to think in local currency.
Absolutely, and that can be difficult at first if you're not as familiar with what things actually cost,
right.
Especially since travelers often get a different price, even at restaurants. You're going to pay more than a local will.
Right.
And so, interesting. Thank you very much for for shedding some light on that tricky topic.
101 on bargaining. Yep.
Yes. Excellent. So I'm curious to hear where you're headed next, and have you learned any, cultural etiquette tidbits or any information about this new place?
So that's a loaded question because I never know where I'm headed next.
Okay.
I just got back from Antigua. I was actually on my honeymoon.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks. And so I can talk about that just in terms of cultural awareness, and then talk about the next potential destination, the big trip in November. There will be probably many more in between. But in Antigua, I began asking friends like that had been there, what they had done and what they went there for, and to understand what their perspective is on Antigua. And then I did a little bit of my own research. And then, honestly, I really left it up to being kind of the tips that I was talking to before, just making sure I was respectful, but also reading body language. And reading how they would treat tourists, being aware of my surroundings, and making sure that the experience that I wanted is what I was going to have. So I went in understanding the basics of the culture, but being open, and then and then really paying attention to people's gestures. So that was Antigua. The next big trip I'm hoping to take is in November, the end of this. There'll be probably many more, knowing me, but is another Asia trip. I want to go back to Sri Lanka because I haven't been there since I was 10. So it's changed quite a bit. And even with going back to a place that is so fond in my memories, it's changed a lot, right? So I have to learn about the culture shifts again. I have to learn about the history. So what I've been doing, excuse me, is trying to find authors who are from the country and read their stories.
Oh, cool. Okay.
As a different way to read about a perspective. And that's been pretty fun so far because I've learned just a lot about how things have changed since the Civil War has ended. I have also been I was also thinking about in that trip, going to Cambodia and Vietnam, and I have not been to those East Asian countries yet. So I've again been talking to friends about that. I've been actually trying to go to local restaurants. It's easy that are Cambodian or Vietnamese in the area, so I can actually not only learn. I mean, I love Vietnamese food, but talk to the owners, because that's the local source of finding more information and maybe learning about some of their relatives that may still be there, who I could meet up with.
Okay. That's a
So,
really good idea.
yeah. And so I've been really trying to think about creative ways to establish links with locals. And that's what I've started to do now. And I'll probably have more conversations and maybe open up a forum to hear more about what people who have been to Cambodia and Vietnam and even Sri Lanka, what they have to say. Maybe have a Q&A or something like that. Something creative that helps me understand a perspective and to ask more questions and to be aware and be curious when I go travel there.
Lovely. If you're interested, Authentic Food Quest, who is sponsoring our day on Sunday, they just got back from a huge trip all through Southeast Asia. And they spent a month in Vietnam, a month in Cambodia, Thailand. They went through the Philippines. And so they have a ton of stuff that they just found, doing, just walking through the streets and finding some amazing restaurants. But they also met with a bunch of really great contacts and wonderful people over there. And so,
Awesome.
they'd be a wonderful resource as well.
Oh, okay. Definitely take me up on that.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing tips on how to be a fearless traveler. And I'm definitely going to take you up on a lot of those on my next trip. And is there anything else you'd like to share with viewers?
Yeah, definitely. So I love answering questions about travel etiquette and kind of like those Dear Abby columns that you used to read, if people are familiar with them. So you ask a question and you're not sure about it, and Dear Abby would respond back. I'm happy to, if anyone ever has a question for me that they may not be so sure about, I'm happy to answer that question. I usually find my information, again, it doesn't just come from me and my research, it comes from more authentic sources that are locals, if I can find it. Or actually, I always try and find, the 6 degrees of separation deal. So I'm always happy to answer questions, just a matter of contacting me at sophia@papilia.co.
Okay, excellent. And people could also reach you through Facebook and Twitter as well?
Definitely.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Claire. This has been amazing.